Hello and good afternoon. At least that's my time here in Salzburg. On behalf of the ISDE and in particular the organizers, I want to welcome you for the second day of the 8th Digital Earth Summit. My task is to handle the back office and stage here in my office in Austria. Otherwise, we as participants, we as panelists are all over the world. And as you're getting settled in, I just wanted to give you a few quick recommendations and tips and tricks for the platform. You've made it into the WebEx Events platform. Congratulations for making it here. If you mouse over the top right-hand side of the display panel, you will notice that there's little icons popping up. They allow you to manage your screen real estate, the setting of the arrangements of video stream and shared slides on the screen. So make it your preferred display. At the left of your panel, of your screen, you have a couple of icons popping up when you move there with your mouse, which helps you controlling the size and the scaling of your display. And usually at the bottom right behind 3 dots, you will find the entrance to the Q&A, and that's the suggestions to keep questions and comments coming throughout the speeches, and we will try to direct the panelists to those inputs from your side. So if possible, don't use the chat, but the Q&A window. That will be pretty much all, which is relevant for successful participation. We today have this morning, this afternoon, or this late night, depending on where you're sitting right now, 2 sessions on offer. The first one will be on digital earth and citizen engagement, and the second, immediately following on that, will be on digital earth education and capacity building. With that, I'd be happy to turn it over to the moderator of the first session, including the first panel, and I'd invite Sven Schade to step forward, share your slides. You already share your video, and take it away.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Joseph, and welcome everybody to today's session on citizen science, citizen engagement, and digital earth. Thanks for joining, and the host for today for this session will be Luis Perez Mora, who we already see on camera, who is actually a representative of the Australian chapter of the International Society for Digital Earth. And myself, I'm Sven Schade. I'm working for the European Commission and its Joint Research Center. So we will walk you through this session, and I hope you will enjoy today's topic. One element, just to re-emphasize what was already said by Joseph, please don't be shy to use the Q&A session. So basically, if any question, any comment comes up during the talks, feel free to already put your questions and comments into that window. We will then have at a later stage the opportunity to revisit what you wrote and address some of your comments directly. So with this, let's get started. We have a packed program, and it will be about citizen science and citizen engagement and digital earth all the way. So, Luis, what do you think about the topic of today? What comes to your mind when hearing citizen engagement and digital earth?
Yeah, so hello everyone, Luis here in Australia. This is a really interesting topic. One of the things that we have been talking about for the last few years, I have to say, is that all our actions should contribute to the well-being of society, and in this context, the engagement of citizens is increasing and recognized as the key ingredient for success. So one of the things that we're trying to understand, or some of the questions that have come up from various sources on the different conferences we have going and from different areas that we have visited is how can we engage? How can we ensure that our citizens engage on this digital Earth agenda all over the planet, and how can we provide them with the right access, or how can we ensure that they collaborate between us? So that's one of the things that I got in my head, and that I'm pretty sure that the panelists that we have here today will be able to help us to understand a little bit more for sure.
Excellent. Maybe hang on there, because maybe we should recon a little bit what actually Digital Earth is all about. So basically, we are here in a Digital Earth Summit, which is organized by the International Society. So maybe just a quick reminder what we will talk about, what we mean when we say Digital Earth. I'm just putting up like 3 quite exciting papers we read not long ago about what Digital Earth actually is. So there has been this paper already 10 years ago, actually, talking about a digital nervous system for the planet, where actually satellites and people are observing our environment and what's going on. Then there has been a definition of where Digital Earth is going as a digital twin of the Earth, and simulating future scenarios where we are going, simulating political decisions and see how they affect ourselves. And only this year there was then this big call for eventually having a new science around all this data, which is describing the Earth and its possible future. So I think this is also a bit the framework we are dealing with, isn't it?
Yeah, those are very good articles, and also journals as well. So this is the interesting part, because one of the things I want to address today, you know what I mean? It's like, okay, cool. So we have Digital Earth citizen engagement. We have these amazing journeys and these amazing journals out there. But there is also a big question that we want to try to answer, and the big question is this: how can Digital Earth empower people to improve social and planetary well-being? So that's the big question, So how can we empower people? How can we empower those that they are interested in knowing more? They are interested in knowing, hey, what is these agendas? What is this Digital Earth? And, they understand, they have what they have researched. But we have this amazing and quite inspiring people out there working on different journals, working on different information. So how can we empower this society and planetary well-being to get there?
Wow, this is a big question indeed. Maybe we can take a step back and start with 2 things. So maybe before going for the big question all in one, maybe we look at a framework that is already well known and established, which is the framework of the Sustainable Development Goals. It was mentioned quite a lot also yesterday at the summit, that there are these 17 goals which provide also a structure to different issues to be addressed for a better planet. And at the same time, also citizen engagement is a huge word. It's really, really big. So maybe we can start with a subset of citizen engagement and what it really is. And one of them I found really, really interesting is this notion of citizen science. So really engaging people in scientific research. So what about using the session to really interconnect these 2 things? So the SDGs and citizen science, and maybe we get first answers to your big question in this way.
Yeah, perhaps. I think one of the things interesting about this session is the panelists that we have here. So it's really, really grateful to see such an interesting mix. You know what I mean? So we have George, we have Stefan, we have Mel, as well as myself. So covering actually different sections of the planet. You know what I mean? As well. So on today's session. So and so maybe we can just let the panelists to perhaps come up with their presentations, and then start to see how we can start to answer this big question through the different presentations that they got.
Excellent. So let's do that. We have great people in the room already. So let's go ahead. Let's maybe start with Jörn Knobloch, who is actually from the German Natural History Museum in Berlin. And he can actually already give us some insights about this big context of the SDGs and citizen science. So let's hand over to Jörn. So I have to stop sharing here, but then Jörn can start telling us more.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you very much, Sven and Luis. And I will give a short overview about the Declaration of Citizen Science and to support the SDGs. And I will share my screen. I can't share my screen.
Joseph?
Just a second. Maybe just go ahead while I'm working on it.
Yes, okay. So what I can say, so I will give a short overview about the Declaration on Citizen Science for Sustainable Development Goals. And the title of this declaration is Our World, Our Goals, Citizen Science for the Sustainable Development Goals. And this declaration was a result of a great conference in October in Berlin, which was, of course, well organized before COVID-19, and after the pandemic, it was just it was held in a hybrid format. But at the end, we have a hybrid format, and we could also work online and offline. So now we'll start with my short presentation. And yeah, this was a conference in October. And we started with interesting point that we have, of course, 17 SDGs. And in the discussion and also in research papers, it is now a common thing that citizen science could contribute all of these single SDGs. And we tried to develop an approach to make this contribution visible, especially for all other actors from this field, which could organize or which could support actions toward sustainable development. This means especially policymakers and research funding organizations and so on. So the declaration was started by the idea that we should develop a formal offer to all stakeholders to respect and promote the contribution of the citizen science. So, and how we could make a declaration from citizen scientists. This is, of course, we need a bottom-up process, because this is, of course, not an authoritarian enterprise. Now this is a democratic citizen enterprise. And so we organized a bottom-up process with the European Citizen Science Association. We organized 5 virtual meetings with the citizen science community. We had on these meetings expert lectures. We had intensive group discussions. So we can see on the slide, we had 21 intensive group discussions. We had 2 discussion drafts of this declaration with collective reviews. And we had an online survey for the title of the declaration. There are 68 votes for the actual title of the declaration. And until today, we have 293 signatories of this declaration. So why the declaration is important? So we started with the idea that we need an instrument to enable funders to do the right thing. So we need a bottom-up process, and should include or integrate as many voices as we could collect, and we should include all the different perspectives from all the different projects, citizen science networks, and so on. And we need a framework which could bind all these levels together. And this means that we have integrated a lot of different levels: international, European, and national policymakers, communities from civil society, scientific communities, cultural institutions, and we also need to build up new robust knowledge communities for sustainable development. And this is, of course, a big enterprise, but because this is a formal document for policymakers, we should bring them down to just 3 groups of recommendations. And the first recommendation, or the first group of recommendations, we call it harness the benefits of citizen science for the SDGs. The second group is strengthen citizen science and its connections with other communities. And the third group is about strengthening future citizen science systems. So maybe we could say that the main exercise of this declaration is that we should find arguments for a mainstreaming of citizen science as a high potential instrument for research policy, to find first makes research for a lot of good data on one side, and on the other side to empowerment people for a sustainable change. And this brings these two things together. This was the main goal of the declaration. So within the declaration, we try to use the use of the declaration is that stakeholders will need or to use it as a practical guide to navigate throughout the 2030 agenda to construct their own portfolio of recommendations and action plans tailored to their specific needs. That means that this declaration is just the beginning or the start of the process for a more or systematic contribution of citizen science for the SDGs. This will be under the understanding that in so doing, they will ultimately contribute also to global development and impacts. And this will try also the declaration to bind together global, national, and the local level of action. And the declaration or the recommendations of this declaration cover a range of potential action which needs to be described in more detail. That means that is the start of the process. And that is now that we have the first step was to formulate this form a document in the first step. And the next step is that we transform this formal document into a living document. And this will be then collect a lot of specific expectations, interests, but also best practice examples, and communicate these to all other from the community and to all other policymakers. So each of the proposed action within the 4 areas of the intervention relates to specific groups of key actors in citizen science from among the following in the EU and the public authorities, citizen science associations and networks, citizen science communities, researchers in academia, private sector, and other research organizations. So what I can now say is what I can now prefer is that we can use the link, and you can also read the content of the declaration. And of course, it is our interest that this paper or this declaration will also communicate to a lot of partners, to a lot of networks, and it should be also convinced a lot of people who are engaged within citizen science or in the SDGs. So far, my short presentation.
Excellent.
And I hope I'm within the time frame.
We're perfectly fine. Thanks a lot, Jörn. Very well. And I pasted also the link to the declaration in the chat window. So, Luis, what do you think? We were not the first to think about this. So a lot of things already going on. There's even an entire declaration that people can read and sign up to. That's fantastic.
Yeah, I know. One of the things that I like is the process is nearly 300 signatures, you know what I mean? And, you know, one of the things that's really interesting is the do the right thing. You know what I mean? That's that little phrase that they got there about these campaigns, do the right thing. So when you bring civil, scientists, etc., and based on these 3 declarations, and I think that their points, the 3 declarations is really interesting. That is the strengthening the future citizen science communities, which is amazing. I find it it's really refreshing to hear that.
Brilliant. Yeah, indeed. And also seeing that was created bottom up and not just put there top down for a declaration to sign it. It's brilliant. It's a very nice approach. So with this, maybe we heard already a bit about citizen science and this wonderful declaration, but maybe we want to see some examples of what citizen science actually is. And what would be better to start from Earth observation, which is actually a field that a lot of people from Digital Earth are very enthusiastic about and familiar with. So, Josef, could you please help us to switch presenters from Jörn to Steffen Fritz from the International Institute of Applied System Analytics, IASA?
Sure.
Not far from you in Austria. Brilliant. Stefan, the floor is yours. Please turn on your camera and microphone, and then you go.
There you go.
Oh. There you are. All right.
Everything is fine now. I just had to first unmute and share the camera, and now share my screen. So this was the
it must be the right sequence.
Exactly. I think now it should be working.
Yep, you got it now.
So you can see me and you can see the presentation. Great. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you very much, Sven, for the introduction. As said, I want to reflect a bit on work we've been doing with respect to engaging citizens in observing the Earth, particularly looking at very high resolution Google Earth imagery, but also to give you a bit of a wider context on how this can fit into the SDGs, and in particularly in the monitoring framework of the SDGs. The magic slide you've already seen by Sven. As we know, we have a lot of SDGs with 269 different indicators we want to measure. So we have really a lot of indicators which we want to use to monitor progress towards the SDGs. And citizens can really play quite a major role in this process. And at the moment, statistical offices rely a lot on the data they have been traditionally collecting with traditional approaches, but Earth observation is playing an increasing role. And also in this paper where we examined to what degree citizen science is already actually contributing to monitoring the SDGs, we found that citizen science is already contributing to 5 of those indicators, 250 indicators, 169 targets we have. What comes out there is that particularly in the field of biodiversity and species observations, citizens are already playing a major role in understanding where species are and where species are currently under threat and declining. And there's another big community which you know very well as part of the Digital Earth community, which is the OpenStreetMap community. And for one indicator, which looks at the rurality index, which looks at how far people are away from roads, OpenStreetMap is widely used for that indicator called 9.1.1, for example. Coming to the examples, of course, you need to create engagement and have an engagement strategy, and there can be different ways. We've been using quite a bit crowdsourcing, and you then kind of move up and intensify the engagement of the citizens. You get more to these co-design approaches, which Mel Woods is going to talk about more. There are many benefits of doing so, and of course the connection with society and the involvement with society of scientists is really becoming more and more important, also if we want to really reach the different goals we have, the SDGs, but also the Paris Agreement. You have many benefits, also the lower costs, and of course the potential change this can drive when you engage citizens. And it can be a lot of fun. And I just will go here very, very quickly. Maybe now I go to presenter mode so you can see it even better. This is some GeoWiki examples. This is a platform we have designed where we do different campaigns on different questions we want to answer. Just want to show you 2. One is on cropland. Is cropland existing in these boxes or not? And what's the field size of the crop field? We're currently also running another one, preparing in 1 week the launch on the drivers of deforestation. That's another thing which citizens can actually answer when they look at this very high resolution 50 centimeter type of imagery. For example, we have all these different tools, NDVI profiles, NDVI means, some guidelines we have, some transparency buttons, some kind of GIS which we have put put online essentially already quite a while ago called GeoWiki. This is some results where we collected many hundreds of thousands of reference points on the existence of crops. This was the field size campaign where we measured how big are the fields. This gives you a lot of information of where smallholder farmers are globally, and we found that there were actually much more smallholder farmers than initially thought and traditionally established. That was actually quite a major breakthrough. Here is the result, and if you look at this map, you can even still see the iron curtain between the east and west that time, where the east had much larger fields, the Kolkosik system, just as one example of many applications. We also then moved this data collection, crowdsourcing activities on the ground. PhotoQuest Go, you might have heard about. You can try it out. It's mimicking the Eurostat Lucas survey with a number of decision trees we have implemented. And another one is called PicturePie. There we are also currently running actually a campaign. So if you want to try it out, just Google PicturePie or go to our GeoWiki website. We are running currently a campaign on food supply using street view photography, street level photography. It can be street view or mapillary, for example, and you just recognize crops, is it present or not. Another one, this is done as part of the Lensens project. We are having an app designed called Natura Alert, where we work with BirdLife very closely. Here we run a campaign in Indonesia, also engaging local communities and indigenous people to monitor threats to biodiversity and in particular important bird areas. These are caretakers, BirdLife caretakers, which take care of these areas which are under protection but increasingly under threat. And we extended that also to Spain in this Lensens project. And I'm here already, I think it's exactly 7 minutes at the end. So thank you very much.
Fantastic, Stefan. Very impressive, and also perfectly on time indeed. Wow. So again, now we saw practical examples what it is all about, and it's pretty exciting. Now it's covering what is it? Agriculture, food. It's really important areas, and it creates massive amounts of possible knowledge with all these existing tools already.
It's really interesting. It's really interesting to see this roadmap for citizen engagement. So using these different tools like the GeoWiki and data collection software like the PhotoQuest, the PicturePile. Also mentioned a few times about the Street View, how it's actually get to use to actually empower these tools as well, and these Natural Alert last software. So it's pretty cool, pretty easy, 2020 type of tools. Put it on your devices and then boom.
Excellent. Yeah, and indeed, I think still there is a connection of classical Earth observation areas, also research areas, and also using relatively classical tools for data collection and analysis. But I found it particularly interesting what you ended with. It was almost an evolution of different kinds of tools, and you really ended with doing also local action and engaging with people at the local level. So maybe we can hear more about this from our next speaker. Here is Professor Mel Woods from the University of Dundee, which we invited to talk more about actually a more co-design approach and really working with people on the ground to even expand our dive into citizen science a bit more.
Yeah, that's cool. So just before Mel starts, just for the participants on the room, if you have any questions, please put it on the chat. I'm actually collecting the questions now. I got a few questions already that is coming on. So yeah, so after that, Mel, the room is yours. Stefan, if we can just turn off the video, that would be perfect.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you very much, Luis. I'll see if I can share my screen now. Okay. So, yeah, my name is Mel Woods. I'm going to be talking a little bit more around taking a step beyond and into data gathering and analysis and to co-design. So collaborative design means designing a multi-stakeholder platform of citizens, policymakers to collaborate together and frequently monitoring critical problems that are local to them, but also are relevant on a global scale. And I'm talking in the context of a citizen observatory, which is a facet of citizen science, where people generally use the mobile devices, low-cost sensors, that's DIY or commercial, to create observations and records around particular issues. So I'll talk in particular about the GROW Observatory, which was monitoring soil moisture as a key role, has a key role in climate regulation, influencing weather systems, of course, and key for land use and food production, and is currently monitored remotely, of course, and used in climate services and disaster management. So we had a scientific objective, which was top-down, which was for the validation of remotely sensed soil moisture using in situ measurements, improving climate services related to extreme climate events, as we've discussed. But we also had a vision to look at the bottom-up engagement of people, and people who were using the land themselves, who actually were interested in generating and sharing and using that data for themselves in different contexts in different parts of the world, using that for soil health and for growing food and for land practices, and then also to address urgent climate challenges for science and society. So why might you use co-design? Well, it's a bottom-up. It enables a meaningful, deeper, longer-term engagement, which of course is highly relevant if you're thinking about long-term change in goals such as the SDGs. It enables people to foster a kind of multi-level governance, connections for different types of stakeholders, from citizens to local authorities to science, partners, NGOs, and a policy level also. It offers opportunity to make positive change, and we can design towards change in order to identify the changes that communities might want to make, as well as those changes that citizens and scientists want to work on together, and then to work towards the SDGs as a coherent, integrated framework. I think one of the main advantages also in co-design is to create a space to facilitate relevant debate around big open data and around decoupling SDGs potentially from economic growth, and around some of the capabilities that we've talked about in the digital twin. So essentially, we're turning data into knowledge for change and moving from data to meaning towards action and change, and all of those steps supporting our citizens and our communities to work with them, which is a highly engaged way of working. So we have a framework and methods for engaging stakeholders. They often identify an issue or gap and for a new initiative at local level to create a new ecosystem. And here on the right, you can see an image of people working together to look at the way data might move in and out of a particular initiative. And here it is around food and hunger and drought. We motivate and engage and plan with stakeholders to form and take action, and we identify what those actions might be collaboratively, and then we find the right team in order to underpin the observatories. And here you can see an example of some of the variety of communities that we involved in GROW, and all of the places that they engaged from, and the stories that they started to tell about their journey along with us. So co-design monitoring, what does it do? It enables communities to make decisions, give them methods to monitor the local environment. They can plan how and what they will measure, how often, by whom. They design together with which technology and tools are going to support the data collection for environmental and geographic dimensions. And we look also at indicators to measure the progress of the project in line with community goals. Of course, many of our goals are long-term, are not within the funded lifetime of these sorts of projects, but we can look towards major goals and then track back and monitor our way towards certain milestones, thus ensuring that we both reach those milestones and that communities are aware that they're making progress. So one of the things, the results that we've got from this approach, we had 24 geographically diverse GROW places, all collecting soil moisture, placing over 6,500 sensors in the ground as of 2019, over 5 million rows of data in the sensor data set, which was continuously monitoring the 4 parameters that we see here: soil moisture, temperature, light level, battery level, and that was the time span for the data. So the conclusion, with the support both of the top-down scientific framing, but the bottom-up nature of working with communities and also opening data so both science and communities can use that data to make change at the local level as well as a large-scale scientific level, we created a high-density network of soil sensors defined according to scientific needs and the social possibilities. The novelty really was the spreading and the scale of that. So the model is viable and demonstrated in the high-density clusters that we call grow places. And in each place, there was a community champion who managed the community, the local expertise, the relevance and the distribution of resources, and then maintained that knowledge at the community level. So they created more resilient communities in terms of the skills in which those communities came to and left with. And they were left with these resources. So they owned the low-cost sensors in the end. They worked with the field handbooks for the ideal installation and sensing practices, and they became aware of data awareness and uptake and were able to apply that for themselves. For anybody who's interested in this type of approach, then you can access a starter kind of kit for this book, and I'll wave a copy in front of the camera here. These are the sorts of co-creation, co-design methods that you can introduce to citizens if you're interested in this, and you'll find if you do a search for the citizen sensing a toolkit online, free to download resource, and you can take a look. And with that, I'll finish my presentation. Thank you.
Wow, you're all so disciplined. And another brilliant talk. Thanks a lot. Now, actually, I have a copy of that in my office, which I didn't read it for quite some time now, but it's there. It's there. Brilliant stuff. So here we go, Luis, the full thing, overall structure, SDG, citizen science, example from Earth observation, and all the way to co-design. Quite amazing, isn't it?
I know, I like it. It's like, you know, at the beginning, taking that step beyond, you know what I mean? And one of the things that come to my head when I was listening to all of this is I kind of stopped thinking about the SDGs, you know, and goal 11, 13, and 17 just come to my head. It's like, you know, 11 for sustainable cities and communities, 13 for climate action, and then the 17 about partnership for the goals. And it's because it's giving that a partnership for sustainable development. You know, once you have all these tools available there, then it's like boom. So you have access to it. You got the different applications, and that's cool. Also, I like that citizen sensing toolkit. I think Mel, I'm not sure how we're going to do this, but we need to bring one to Brisbane here. So I haven't seen it yet. So I definitely have to get a copy of it.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So. Sven, so there is some questions, some things that have come up. So I'm not sure what do you think. Maybe we can just go with few of the questions. Maybe ask the panelists if you guys would like to have a go and answer in there. Just put your camera up. Just you go with it. What do you think, Sven?
Absolutely, yeah. Please, if everybody could switch on the camera and the microphone when you speak, but certainly already the camera. And then we go through some of the questions that already come in the chat, and we also have a few ourselves. Maybe we spare you the big question, we'll see, but we'll have a few also for you. So yeah.
So I got one here. So the first question I got for the panelists is, how do you see the connection between your work and the Digital Earth edition and its applications? I will just repeat the question. How do you see the connection between your work and the Digital Earth vision and its applications? I think Mel want to say something. Right?
I suppose, so it's Mel here. I suppose in the case of Grow, we were creating obviously a digital ecosystem for data to validate Earth observation in a sense, in a small scale way, and through that also starting to enable that kind of future thinking about and predictions about how data may be used in the future as well. So on a very small scale, with that one project, we were looking both at a very grounded local physical sort of Earth observation from people, but we're also creating the digital data space as well for all of that work to happen. So I think it's in the, I guess maybe the digital ecosystem in effect is a small example of what could be contributed to the Digital Earth vision, and it becomes very interesting when you see the interaction of communities as well as scientists in that project. But I can hand over to others.
Yep. Maybe is it okay? Yes. Just to complement to what Mel said, I think if we look globally at different places in the world, now beyond what is done in the Western world, where we have quite a very rich data ecosystem in many places, there are a lot of places in the world where we don't know even how many people live in that country, where we don't even know where people actually live, where the population and how the population is spatially distributed, and only models can tell us this. There is a big lack in information, in data itself in a lot of countries. So if you look at the Sdg monitoring framework and the overall costs to monitor each indicator, for example, the costs are tremendous, and a lot of countries are simply not able to do that, to undertake that monitoring. So Earth observation, on the one hand, has really a big potential to close some of these existing data gaps. And additionally, I think citizens should not, and we said that repeatedly, should not just be seen as data providers and not only as sensors, but additionally, if many times a local problem, at the same time as solving that local problem or working towards solving this local problem, data is being collected and can then be really be used to close these big data gaps which exist. So I see the alignment really nicely be due to those big data gaps we have, and it's about finding intelligent ways of linking the needs of people with the more wider data needs of the Sdg monitoring community, for example. Thanks.
John, do you have something to add, or because we have plenty of questions coming in, so happy to just go into the next one, but the answers have been actually quite amazing. So John, do you have something to say?
No, nothing special, so please, maybe it's better go to the next question.
Okay, let's go with Sven.
Yes, it's maybe sort of a follow-up to the first one on the Digital Earth vision and applications. And it's more connected to what Mel actually ended with in the whole series of interventions. Because very often, especially in this Digital Earth community, we see almost a bias towards more technical-oriented people. I'm not saying we are all technical-oriented, but quite a few. So how do you see actually these interplay between the Digital Earth vision, which has actually quite a lot of technical aspects to it, a lot of data handling, simulation, and what we heard about in terms of really engaging people, also engaging people with very different backgrounds, which don't have a certain technical literacy, for example. We also have some views on this to how people could actually deal with all these digital twin sensor data ecosystems and how to make this connection more natural or help people to benefit from what is emerging.
Is this directed at myself, Sven?
May start again.
Yeah, start again. Okay. How to help them? I think well, one of the things that I think becomes a really a motivator for people to get involved, aside from the motivation to make change, is access to the data, so that the data isn't only available for scientific modelling or within the system. That actually we have something called in GROW we called it the positive leaky pipeline, so that data is actually leaked out and that may be exclusively available to a community that's gathered it, or certainly available to that community and others that maybe use it in a certain way through license and by agreement or what have you, for innovation purposes, so that they're able to not only contribute to this much bigger aim, but also have the benefit of experimenting potentially with data at a hyper-local level to solve some of the issues that they might have. So I think that your other question about how can we support them, I think is dependent on the shape and the nature of the project. It's very bespoke, and I gave an example of both community management and community champions that are situated in a community and that have a sort of framework of delivery of support, various kinds of education on the one hand, but also of training and resources and data awareness, etc. on the other. So I could talk for a long time, but I'll let somebody else come in on that.
Excellent, thanks a lot, Mel. Maybe it's also, it has a bit of a relation also to these bottom-up processes, no? Because, okay, it's a long shot from the digital ecosystem to the process that Jörn and the guys were following in putting a declaration together. But maybe can you share a few more thoughts on how you actually manage this process to engage people bottom up in your activity?
Yeah, maybe I can just elaborate a little bit more on, how we can strengthen the link from the digital Earth concept to making it attractive for citizens and engaging them. And I think one path is to make it relevant, as also Mel has described in detail. But the other field, I think, and this was even mentioned today in the introduction by Alessandro Annoni, is there's a whole world out there of people engaging in video games, and a young generation is drawn into those and fascinated by these video games, which are essentially virtual worlds. So one dream could be to try to link this up more. We have been trying this actually for quite a while, not really successfully, because these communities, they don't talk so much to each other, and it's a completely different concept. But I think if we can introduce more so-called serious gaming into the gaming industry, where there is a gaming for a purpose, where you kind of blend more these virtual worlds with the real world, and where you try to also engage young people who might be players of those games into doing something more useful, maybe, while at the same time having the same level of fun. This could be really a very interesting entry point to making, to changing the world in the end, also engaging a community which might be initially less interested, and making it fun, using all these amazing virtual techniques we have now with using digital Earth and virtual reality, for example. Augmented and virtual reality can really play a big role in that. And then, of course, also the way you design things, how you design it, how easy entry barriers you make for different communities, different age groups also. And we know that the older people have not been engaging that much in it, and there might be new innovative ways of trying to start with something simple, something they know, and then onboarding them into some more digital kind of worlds. So these are my thoughts. Thank you.
Excellent. Thanks, Stefan. Jörn, over to you.
Yeah, maybe just also with regard to the bottom-up process and the approach to invite and to include as much people as possible. I think that every new technical structure, new technical thing like the big data or the communication platforms on the internet are able to build new visions and to build a new world and a new positive vision of the future. But on the other side, we should also every time have in mind that only well-educated citizens could successfully use this new structure, this new technical opportunities. And that is what is also to organize bottom-up processes. For this, you need well-educated and independent citizens. And this is, I think, made for the vision of a digital earth and all these good visions or the good opportunities relating to that you need a process of co-evolution. You need better educated citizens which are independent, have a high degree on autonomy, sophisticated approach to technical structure. And on the other side, you should also use this new technological structure to have a non-closed or non-finished process to set new standards. And these standards should be every time used, should be discussed and reviewed, and then we should new develop. And only this twofold process, the co-evolution of the technique and the use of the techniques on the one side, and the more education and the well education of the people on the other side, could bring this positive vision to practice or to the real world.
That's cool. Thank you for that input, Jörn. I have like a lot of questions here, so I will go with the Q&A section that we have here. I have some specific questions for specific members of the panel. So actually, Jörn, you are one. This is from Elsa Fonseca. Do Jörn know what platforms with geological and archaeological data of buildings? She also says that I searched some ruins.
So related to our conference, we had a lot of projects, and I guess there were also projects which have an archaeological focus, but now I haven't the right answer. So, but if you have any still more information, so please contact me and I can search for them.
Well, thank you for that. I got a question for Mel. How do you recruit the community champions? Roughly, how many hours per month did they commit to the project?
That is a good question. So for the latest the Grow project that I spoke about just now, the community champions, we had a phased approach. So we had a first year where we had a small number of early adopters that we reached out to our kindred networks. We had a couple of NGOs and through within the project, and so we reached out for early adopters in order to build and test and overwinter the sensors. So we did a lot of validation work with the sensors. We did some validation work alongside official monitoring stations, and we were doing things like testing the protocols and testing the distribution plan, testing the housing, the sensor housing, etc., etc. So we had a smaller number of 5 community champions to start that were either within the project itself related to our partners or very close in kindred networks where we tested everything out. And in the second year, we launched an open call, and we had, from the experience of the first year, a number of factors that we were looking for for communities to come on board. And they included previous experience of kind of education initiatives, possibly access to a community hall or a meeting space that they would be able to meet up with people, and experience of hosting those kinds of events. We looked for the fit to the soil moisture and what they might want to do with the data, so looking at the kind of problem that they would want to address, and that they had the ability to reach people. And we had a long debate about what we should do regarding their time input, because of course we know a lot of citizen science is volunteer, but these were sort of roles that really we were bringing in to work collaboratively with our community champions, so required a higher input. And in the end, they were required to distribute sensors, receive and distribute sensors. So we actually contracted successful communities with and the community champion themselves to do these tasks, and they were paid in kind in order to host events and given a budget in order to do that. And that's one way of doing it, not always the way. They worked with us over the course of between 1 to 2 years in order to fulfill the distribution of sensors, and some community champions oversaw the distribution of over 1,000 sensors in each of the places. So it was a very big task. So that's how we recruited, and we actually had a third year of recruitment to bring on the last cohort of community champions to fulfill our final figures. And there you see the adopters that actually were spurred on by the results of the first 2 years. So they were super keen. And by that time, we were really running very slick, a lot more slick way. We got past a lot of the bumpy technical issues and those sorts of things. And so they really could get up to speed very quickly, and with all of the resources able to work with the communities in that sense. So we had a phased approach and open calls for interested and relevant communities to come on board.
Thank you, Mel, for that one. I got another comment and also positive feedback in conjunction with two questions. This is from Julia Vera. So he said, thank you for the fantastic contributions. I find the combination of the scientific top-down approach and bottom-up approach very interesting. Do you have a scientific framework first, and then you thought about how to engage citizens in data gathering? That's the first question. Second one would be, do you have any examples of initiatives that started bottom up and were then picked by scientists? Thanks. Smiley face. Love the smiley face at the end.
If you want, I can start. Then we break the cycle, starting with Mel, if that's okay.
Perfect.
Yeah. I got a way to deal with gender balance. She gets more airtime, huh?
Whatever. We all think the same, so that matters more. Anyway, no, I just wanted to address that. So a lot of the activities we've been doing was more of an initial scientific question we had. So it is an answer to the question is yes. This is a scientific framework. So we do have certain problems where we have, for example, data gaps about knowing knowledge about, for example, what I have presented, field stress distribution globally. And that's what we then do, and then we start the engagement process. And this, you could describe this more as a top-down scientific process. What we are then experiencing is that citizens engage to different levels. So some they see themselves more as data gatherers indeed, and some they even step up and make a contribution to a scientific paper we are preparing together with them, because they many times become co-authors. And I want to say something a little bit more generic also about this. I think we have to also acknowledge that both of these approaches bottom-up and top-down, have their validity. For example, a very extremely successful project which was run, it was Curious and Noses, is about measuring NO2 air quality in Flanders and in Brussels. Was extremely successful. If not, it was one of the most successful projects where most citizens, in the sense where most citizens actually were actively involved and where you could also measure impact on the policy landscape in their voting behavior, for example, later. I mean, it's not all proven, but there is some hypothesis about that. And that was more, it was not fully top-down, but that was more or less a top-down process with a protocol where people were asked to do certain things. And then people said, yes, I want to know the air quality in front of my door. Yes, I want to know. All the scientific framework was actually given to them. And then there are other very valid and important, very bottom-up co-design procedures. And I think we have to get away from this, I call it now a bit extreme, obsession to say, you know, one only co-design only works and is the only way forward. And that has become a bit of a mantra. And I think we have to acknowledge that depending on what question we have and what we want to answer, we need to be open for all of these approaches. And the second one, for example, the biodiversity community. So if you look at species monitoring traditionally, you can go back to the 1900s, where people, instead of shooting birds, started to record bird species. So that was actually a big change. People did the Christmas bird count. This data, which is extremely valid and is picked up by scientists for amazing scientific analysis they are doing. So they didn't know, scientists initially, how valuable this species data would become for scientific work. So yes, there are a lot of examples of where there is initially a bottom-up process and then it leads to some scientific output. Thanks.
Excellent. No, I think we have already a very nice discussion going here. Many interests, many questions also in the chat and the Q&A. So a lot of links are shared. A lot of thank you to all the presenters. So that's brilliant. We shared the link to the declaration already. So maybe more people sign up. Also information about the toolkit has been shared and so on. So that's all going on perfectly. I would have one question to Josef, if you're listening in. I see that the recording or the results will be shared. Will there also be a sharing of the slides or the presentations in PDF, or is it more the recording that you're going for?
Well, that will be a question to everyone on the panel. So anyone who wants to share their slides and is willing to share the slides with the audience, I'm sure they can be put on the website as such. Otherwise, the live stream on Facebook, this will stay there as a recording and will be accessible as well. And of course, we will try to cut the presentations into nicely manageable chunks after the sessions and make that available on the website as well. Okay. Let me maybe take this opportunity to point out that anyone who feels better or feels that it's easier to phrase a question orally, you just might want to raise your hand. You will find your hand to be raised by opening the participant tab in the bottom right of your screen, and then a panel opens up, and on the bottom of that there is a hand which you can raise, and then we can give you a voice outside of the Q&A as well. So that's an invitation to chime in for everyone who wants to speak up.
Oh, yeah, that would be brilliant. There's not only us speaking, hearing someone from the audience would be ideal. So if anybody wants to step up, please go ahead. I don't know if what we will see if somebody raises a hand, or is it Josef, is it you?
We should see a hand and we can then open the mic for them.
Okay, anybody wants to ask a question in person?
I cannot see any hands coming.
That's fine. So as long as there are no hands coming, we have more questions. It's great already to have you all here, and we can grill you a little bit. So that's really appreciated. There was also a question on funding for these projects. How do we actually have these projects? Which is the nature of these projects? Maybe I turn it a bit more general. These things you are presenting and also what you experienced at the SDG conference, is it projects which just run a few weeks or a year, or is there also something which really is maintained and runs for a longer period of time? So who would like to jump on that one?
I can start from my overview, from the point of from the position of an overview. I can say that there are a lot of projects which are already organized for time period of 3 years, for example. Yes, so these are the normal timeline for research projects. Maybe some general words about opportunity to funding such projects from also from the perspective that research funders or research strategies should or could support such projects and give them money. I think there is first the problem that if research or if funders from the sphere of policymakers, for example, like to support citizen science because they are now have the picture that citizen science are great contributions, make a great contribution to the SDGs, that this should be also put into main strategies for research funding policy. And therefore, I think, what is my opinion, is that we have a lot of successful citizen science projects and a lot of opportunities. We also learned today for specific contribution of citizen science for specific data monitoring and so on. And the challenge, I think, is that especially for the policymakers, is to organize strategies which could be also give money to such initiatives. And therefore, I think the main challenge is that we should bring order to citizen science and to the contributions of citizen science for SDGs. And so we have there, of course, a lot of approaches, and in the process, of the bottom-up process for the declaration, we deal with, or we played with the approach that we should take 3 or 4 main groups of the SDGs, which are related to environment, economy, social sphere, and so on. And then we should look into these special spheres or these special groups of the SDGs, or the goals of the Sustainable Development Goals. And for these specific groups, we should then organize, or should be develop strategies for research funding for citizen science. So this is one approach to just bring order to this field of a lot of projects, global, local, national, on these different levels. And I think this should be a main step for the next research strategy, or for the next years, for policymakers to develop a systematic approach to support citizen science.
Very good. I think it speaks a lot to this framework of research funding as compared to other funding mechanisms. Any more thoughts on sustainability? Or not everything may have to be sustained? Any reaction to that?
Maybe just one point, what I wanted to add to this. So indeed, I think not everything has to be sustainable, but I think what is sometimes helpful, and already Jörn has alluded to it, is if it is clear and obvious to the policymaker that there is a benefit to have the citizen science activities, that there is a mechanism and a type of funding, longer-term funding stream found for those, that needs to happen, and that there needs to be some kind of institutionalization of that. And I think it is happening to some degree in Europe, and I can see it also with respect to some of the Green Deal. Europe, I think, made quite a major step forward in fleshing out all the different documents around this Green Deal, where citizen science is actually playing an important role, and this is part of it. But the other one is just one example, which is a really successful example. It was actually just published. I will try to find the link and paste the paper in the chat box. Has just been published. It's on a case study in Venice, around the Venice two basins actually, where it's, I think, for the first time to that large extent, I think it's altogether 5 million, 2.5 million for each of those catchment areas, where citizen science activities are seen as an official data stream for flood monitoring, where of course awareness raising and preparedness is an important component, and where an initial cost benefit analysis of that has been done, showing that it's actually cheaper if you invest in citizen science, even for the overall benefit, than when you use traditional approaches. So that's something I will put in. So that's an example where, you know, it is, the awareness is there, the willingness of the policy is there, and where people have managed to actually convince the policymakers to put money on the table. And, you know, should there be successful projects, I think there should be a mechanism found. For example, in the Curious Innosa project, even the director of the European Environmental Agency tried actually for quite a while to replicate. It still didn't happen, which is a bit of a shame. So it's something we need to better understand why, and hopefully in the future there will be more of those more agile ways of funding certain promising citizen science activities.
Very well.
Thanks.
Before going back maybe to another, if Luis has another question, I don't know. Just to react to that one, because there was a recent publication also on starting a theory about the spreading and scaling of citizen science, which is indeed interesting to see what are the success stories to scale up or to spread successful initiatives. So indeed, the example mentioned on the Curious Innosa and the European Environment Agency is interesting, because they actually succeeded to replicate parts of this work in different schools across the EU, but also only to some extent. So it's really interesting to dive deeper into the different cases and start putting things into more structure. Also, as maybe a provocative statement, it's also a question, some of these citizen science initiatives don't want to be institutionalized. No? So there is also actually an aspect in several projects where citizen sensing, for example, happens because people want to create evidence to stress their local governments. So we were investing a few very interesting cases about water pollution and farmers, for example, which even examine the kidneys of their sheep to really show the environmental damage done by polluted water. Anyway, not to get lost in those many exciting details. I'm sure we can fill an entire conference with it. Luis, do you have more questions?
I have one here. Actually, it was on the Q&A. I just trying to reword it a little bit. So this is for all the panelists about what do you see? This is from Lee. What do you see as the top 2 policy challenges related to citizen science based on your work? This is more also, if you could make a recommendation, I will say in this case to perhaps your government administration, so in various different countries, what recommendations will be regarding citizen science, what would it be?
Oh, that's a Leah question. I could tell without reading the name, but I just cross-checked.
Yes.
So that's Leah Shanley from the US.
May I can interrupt and say, yeah, I think one very impressive tool for further support of citizen science, especially to contribute to SDGs. It's what we said is that to start the process of mainstreaming citizen science as a normal part of citizen engagement on the one side, and of course of the normal academic science on the other side. And therefore we could just think about good instruments to bring this relationship to a fruitful on a fruitful, or we could state this on a fruitful base. And therefore, for example, I see maybe, or this the recommendation to institutionalize. So we could say we could call it citizen science competence centers, for example, which are based in local, but also national and global level. And these competence centers, citizens could be found in program of education for citizen science, for example, but also in good structure or good approach for communication. This is what Sven, of course, said, that many scientists, citizen scientists are not ready to institutionalize themselves as an organization. But these competence centers could institutionalize are the channels of communication between citizen scientists and the public sphere, and for also the policymakers. And so this, in my opinion, this is a good step forward if we try to establish such kind of citizen science competence centers on all levels, and which could be support the enterprise of citizen science.
That's you're thinking along the same lines, but I'm thinking at a much younger age, I guess. One of the things that we have done in GROW, and also the current project actually where I'm working with Stefan, is using education resources, using education programs to train people in all sorts of aspects of citizen science. And we've done that through massive open online courses or MOOCs. But I see increasingly we're thinking about the younger generation and about the education of science in school setting. And I think there's a huge opportunity to reframe science as a questioning of the world, and training our young people on how to answer their own questions, how to come up with their own questions, how to create hypotheses, and how to begin to investigate that, getting out of the classroom and from behind the screen and out into the real world, in order to do that, if that's of interest to them. We had a facet of that in GROW where people had hypotheses and went out to test them, and that was particularly in terms of permaculture validation. So it was a really powerful way of people getting involved, and I think we also see that people engaging don't see what they're doing as science. They actually don't talk about science. They don't realize sometimes actually what they're doing is science and is validating, is a validation of science. And they certainly see experts as scientists in white lab coats, but so democratizing that a little more and bringing it into schools in a different way and teaching science in a different way, I think would be incredibly valuable.
That's cool. Stefan, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, maybe I will try to continue on the provocative side, if that is okay. Just to add what Mel said, not to be provocative to Mel. I fully underscore what she said. I think what is really critical is, and I'm also there in line with Jorn, is the educational part and the lifelong learning part. And I think, to set up maybe lifelong learning centers in the US, in some places where citizen science can be reborn in some places, like where we were very worried, by the way, about the US election. We are quite happy that it's the Biden administration and not another one. For example, what happened in Florida, why did that happen, what happened in Florida, and to understand that, but to try to maybe also for the Democrats to understand a little bit more, where those places, for example, farmers, this links very much to the GROW project. Are there maybe some ways to reach out to new communities, which until now, those more educated people and universities have not yet done and not managed. Can we find new ways, as also Mel has said, of engaging some completely new communities in some type of science, even they might not even realize that it's science, in something which touches them, which is important for them, where we can get more. I think the overall challenge in the US in particular is really education. It's really basic education and critical thinking. I think that's something which the Biden administration has to work on, and citizen science can for sure play a role there. Thanks.
That's definitely interesting comments there from the three of you guys. So on these questions, definitely a lot to think, a lot to take, and a lot of takens for certain. There is a question that it has come up, and Sven and I, we have been thinking about this one for quite a long time as well, and we haven't definitely put it out there. And based on the presentations that we have today, and based on the forum that we are at the moment, I'm thinking about ISDE, or the International Society of Future Earth. So the question that Sven and I will have, and Sven, please feel free to complement the question, is for the panelists, for the three of you, which role would you see for ISDE to contribute? Sven?
Yeah, exactly. So this is our second big question. Huh? We saw now in your presentations, but also in the discussion, which very impressively unfolded, I have to say. Thanks for all of your contributions. That there is a lot already going on, and many groups do exist. But of course, as part of this society for Digital Earth, we also ask ourselves, what can we do to contribute to the bigger picture? And among others, actually next year, and actually Josef will be again a kind host next year, hopefully in person. There will be also the next Digital Earth Symposium in Salzburg. So in 1 year time, a bit less actually, there would be another milestone. We really want to understand what as a society we could bring to this topic on citizen engagement, citizen science, let's say over the next year. So you're 1 minute per person. What do you want us to do? And do you see a role for ISDE, given that it's already a very rich landscape out there? Please. We like to close with the tricky question. Here you go.
And definitely not all at the same time, for certain. So should we pick, like, I don't know, George, would you like to start, or Mel, or Stephen?
Maybe I start very generally, because I'm just start with the general view, and then we can go further to Mel and the others with a specific focus on citizen science. Well, I think any idea start with a public process of communication. So we just now talk about the opportunity of citizen science and the need to support citizens, the SDGs and so on. We need a more equal process of communication on the world and on a global level. And therefore, we should look forward how we could, or is it possible to organize such a new public sphere? Because we need strong science on the one hand, we need also strong citizens on the other hand. And only with the communication process between these two sides, we can then have a systematical search, or initiate a systematical search on the specific contributions of one to another. And I think that the technical infrastructure, or the technical network, or the technical foundation of such a public sphere should be organized that we also have no barriers for people to join this process of communication, and it should also find or rise the view of the people to deal with these problems, to see this as an opportunity. And this is also not just an offer for communication, but also not just an invitation for communication, but also a strong political argument for communication. And this should be have an equal approach, and it should be also have no barriers, also on the political sphere, that we can say we should, because when we talk about the opportunity, the contribution of citizen science for the SDGs, this is of course a question of data research or monitoring and scientific questions as well. But what we do with, or what is possible to do with these results for the sustainable development, this is of course then a political question. And here we come to my presentation back, and then I will finish. Is that we have now the declaration for the support of for citizen science for the SDGs. This now is just a document from a scientific perspective. But now we need the next step. This is to politicize, politicize this document, to make this to transform this to a political document. And this is of course a main challenge. And now we need scientific standards, but democratic standards. And therefore, I think the Digital Earth could be a very good infrastructure to enable such a process of communication.
Excellent. Thanks a lot, Jörn. So we take this as your final statement because we're towards the end of the session. Very well done. Who wants to shoot next? Stefan or Mel?
I'll jump in very briefly. I think, of course, I've got to talk about co-design because, of course, that's something, or co-creation, and that's something I believe passionately is the way in which to bring people together. And I think Jörn's hinted at that. There are a number of communities of practice, some of which have emerged out of We Observe the project itself, and some colleagues are running those currently. And one on the SDGs that has been particularly successful, run by Dilek, Fraser also from IASA, Stefan's colleague, and others around open science, etc. And so I think these communities of practice are out there and are very welcoming spaces to bring people together. There are also the existing biannual conferences and other types of conferences. We all know about Earth observation, but also EXA and other communities that are existing. And I think it is about making those connections, and whether Digital Earth needs a new community of interest in the start to co-design the possible goals of such an endeavour, bringing citizen science and Digital Earth together might be an interesting question, but also engaging with some of these existing and highly successful communities would be a way forward. Bringing that into the kind of political strategies of the next few years, including the Green Deal, and I know here in the UK there's going to be a number of announcements from the government, also and very shortly actually, around biodiversity in particular. Then there is a developing and moving and deepening picture driven by our citizens themselves and what they want to see happen in the world. And so it is not always necessarily about setting up something new, but a renewed effort to engage with what's there and also test whether from your side to create a community that's outward facing, bringing people in, would be my advice.
Excellent. Well, thanks a lot, Mel. That's very useful, very helpful and actionable. We have 2 more minutes before the next session. So I'm sorry for everybody who wanted to take a break between this one and the education and capacity building, but we were taken away. But I think it was a very useful discussion already, and I think it will feed into some follow-up activity and also preparations for the symposium. So, Stefan, do you want to leave us with a few words?
Yeah, I'll be very brief. Thanks a lot. I just noticed that I hadn't copied. I pasted now to everybody these 2 things. Also, the communities of practice, which was mentioned by Mel. Yeah, thanks a lot. I think I have not much to add. I think this is a very good point. So linking up existing communities starting the conversation. And I think with this session, you already have started this process. So was already a move into that direction. And then maybe just to add what I said before, I don't know really, but I'm just thinking loud here now, if maybe the community around Digital Earth could play some role of leveraging also the connection with industry. I think industry, as we have also heard from one of the presentations, has really moved the Digital Earth forward a lot, with Google Earth, just as one of many other examples where industry has played an important role. And I'm just wondering that if also with for example, the gaming industry is a massive business, and it's kind of now blending more and more with also the digital Earth kind of concept of virtual reality. So I'm thinking if maybe there could be some leverage on trying to link also industry and citizens more closely together in, for example, designing really new, cool, serious games where there is really a purpose, a game with a purpose. I don't know if that's possible, but I'm just, as said, I'm just thinking loud here just to add and to.
Okay. No, that's brilliant.
Yeah.
Sorry to cut you short here, but yeah, perfect. Yeah. Very well. Thanks again to everybody, to all in this session, and also the many people answering and asking questions all over. Josef, we are done, and we are ready to hand over to you for your next session.
Okay.
There you go.
Sven and Louis for moderating, and all the panelists, as well as everyone participating so actively. I believe this really was a wonderful session, and I'm glad we could have it in this format. There was a question, what happens to all the links? We have collected them, and we can consolidate these, and we'll make these available through the website. So we are moving straight over to the next session, the Digital Earth Education and Capacity Building. But if you need to rush away for a quick topic off for coffee or any other media, then please do so right now while we are switching over to the next panel. But don't get lost. We'll get started in a minute or so.
Josef, can you?
Yes, I can hear you.
Take away my panelist role, and I'm.
I've done that, but you have to mute yourself.
Sure.
Victoria, if you can hear me, I can see you, but I cannot, for some reason, cannot make you panelist yet. Okay, with that, I believe we can get started and move over to the session 4. You should be able to briefly see my screen just to remind ourselves of the agenda as we're moving on to the session Digital Earth Education and Capacity Building. There will not be any major introduction by myself, simply because the first talk by Justin Blanford just serves perfectly well as an introduction. There are 4 panelists in this session. You can see the first 2. Justin Blanford from ITC and Jerry Miller from Esri. And there will be 2 more talks by John Wilson from University of Southern California and Victoria Rautenbach from Pretoria University. Those 2 I'll be bringing onto the panel just during the first talk. And yeah, just by way of advertising some forthcoming initiatives, give me half a minute to point out, as we talk about education and educational initiatives, let me point out the European Copernicus Masters in Digital Earth, which is a joint master's program by 3 universities in France, in Czech, and in Austria. And actually, the reason why I'm pointing this out is that currently the call is open to apply for scholarships and admission to this program. So if anyone wants to forward this information to your students, alumni, around your whoever's, this is currently the annual call for admission into this program. Secondly, and Sven Schade already has graciously mentioned next year's ISD Symposium, what I would like to briefly advertise is the ISD 12 Youth Forum. We will disseminate more information to all the registered participants in this summit over the next couple of days. But let me just highlight this youth forum, which will not only happen in Salzburg next summer, but the main reason I mention it now that we're already starting initiatives by local groups, by community groups, by discipline-specific groups, which then should culminate in a meeting in next year's conference, in next year's symposium. So it's important to get started with these initiatives pretty much now. But with that, I'd like to hand it over to Justine. I'll make it a presenter right away. So that would give you the opportunity to share your presentation. I again would suggest that everyone who is speaking keeps on their cameras. And again, the Q&A is open, is available for everyone during the talks to come forward with any kind of questions, comments we'll be dealing with later on in the panel discussion round. But first, we would take it away with a round of brief presentations, and Justin Blanford would go ahead with that. And yes, you are sharing now.
I see that. And
the key point, and that's why I'm very happy that we have Justine to going first here, is that this title we've put actually on the agenda, the Resiliency in Global Geoscience Education. This is a major initiative. It's an initiative definitely fitting perfectly well into a digital Earth environment because it's a worldwide, a global initiative. And I'm sure we'll learn a lot about this in the next couple of minutes. Justine, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Thank you, Joseph. Thank you very much for inviting me. I'm Justine Blanford. I'm at ITC, where I'm Professor of GeoHealth with also an emphasis on education. So I thought I would talk a little bit about resilient GI science education and what that means and some of the things that we found out from our global conversations. We're all very, very aware of COVID-19 and the inequalities that have arisen, and also what this means for remote learners. At least 500 million students, and this is not broken down by age groups or anything, do have problems with remote learning access. So we still have a huge digital divide problem that we need to solve. So one of the questions that we were trying to figure out with our global conversations was, what is resiliency in GI science education? So we brought together panelists from around the world, and we had 3 sessions. One was North America, one was Europe and Africa, and one was the Far East and Australia. And we posed these questions to different educators. So one of the things that became immediately apparent, and I think everybody can understand this, is that we went into lockdown. So it was that shock moment, like, oh my God, what are we going to do? Some universities reacted to this in different ways and completely shut down and stayed shut down. Others shut down for a week so that their faculty could transition and prepare, and then started all teaching in an online mode. So we responded by trying to adjust, adapt, develop new ways of delivering our education and what courses we were teaching at the time. So we responded. At the end of the school year, many of us had a little bit of time so that we could reflect on what happened, what worked, what didn't work, so that we could start planning again for that next phase. And then again respond to what was going to go in the fall semesters, and figure out how we were going to recover. And now we're in the mode of what is going to happen and figure out what is going to be normal or the new normal. So these are all very different phases of what many of us have gone through. So what really is resilience? It's the ability to prepare, to plan, to absorb, to recover, and adapt to any changes and disturbances. And we do have a paper that we summarized the discussions in on the website, and we can put that into the chat later. So one of the other things also within ITC is we also wanted to understand, how resilient we were within our education system. So we also had a little survey that we did, and we sent this out to both faculty and to students so that we could figure out whether students were happy with what education took place, and also with staff and how they felt students did during this time. Overall, everyone did feel that they successfully completed the course. There was a small percentage of the students that didn't. The students did appreciate that teachers showed fruition to deliver the courses and to adapt courses. And also they felt that they finished the courses properly. So what attributes are key for resiliency in GI science education? We have to deal with a lot of technology pieces, and also with being able to deliver that, and things that we normally did in the field work now has to all be digital. So again, here are the things that we talked about with our different panels. We did pedagogies on our first panels, and the second one was implementation. And what we wanted to know was what we could learn from each other, and also what could we, how could our experiences and opportunities help us with rethinking what's in the future. So what attributes are necessary? So these are some of the things that came up from the discussions. Motivation, a lot of teachers were very motivated to adjust their courses so that they could deliver them and still provide quality education. They learned new skills. They were innovative. It was a time for redesigning some of their courses because they had to be creative. Some of them who had previous online experience felt that that helped and contributed to being able to adjust and move from a face-to-face to an online environment. A couple of things that definitely came through was the need to be to have empathy, and also to be flexible with your students because of whatever was going on at the other end that the student had to deal with. So being understanding, patient, and inclusive. And really think, when you're redesigning, also to think of what were the essential pieces that you needed to continue to teach. But at the center of all this was community, and also the use of open educational resources. So communities and networks were really at the heart of making this a resilient community, where using open sources, sharing, learning what we did, and then creating new ways to deliver new ways of delivering the key things that we wanted to get across. So designing for resilient education systems as we move forward. So at ITC, we ran a survey where we were interested in understanding the different pieces that go into designing education pieces. So thinking of the technology infrastructure, were there any barriers for our students? Learning environments, are there any changes that we needed to make there? Courses, the content, the assessment, and the interactions, and how these were the experience was for both staff and students, so that we can then start to make future improvements. So now we're trying to figure out that balance between lectures, activities, and interactions, and from that survey, we've identified some things that we can fix because they're within our control, and then things that are beyond. So some things that are beyond our control are students who are overseas who might not have good internet access. And that is not because they can't afford to pay for it, but it's because the provision in those countries is not sufficient, so it's very, the quality is not very good. So going back to the original question, what is resiliency in GI science education? One thing that I think many of us have experienced is that we were still able, for the most part, to deliver our courses, and the students were successful in completing those courses, but it does take a huge community effort to be able to do that. Within our departments, I'm sure that many of you spoke to colleagues, and we also had to talk with the IT department, at our universities to make sure that some of those infrastructures that might not have been working properly were working properly. So I'll leave it on that note, and of course the acknowledgements of all the organizing committee from the global science education pieces, and I've also included the student and staff here at ITC who were part of putting that survey together, and also for taking the survey so that we could start to think about what some of these pieces are to help us continue to develop resilient GI science education.
That's great. Justine, thank you very much for reporting on the current status of this initiative. I'm sure we'll hear a lot about that in the weeks and months to come. And I'm equally confident there will be quite a few comments and questions along those lines, since much of what you have been mentioning is a shared set of experiences over the last couple of months. Before we dive deeper into the discussion, I'd be happy to turn it over to Jerry Miller from the Esri education team. And yeah, I think you should love your place in the forest. And I think the interesting aspect, this at least was my personal experience over the last several months, over this period of time, Justine just has talked about, that cloud has become cloud computing, cloud resources, open and easily accessible resources on the cloud have been turning more and more into a core infrastructure for education. So yeah, please, over to you.
Wonderful. Thank you so much, Joseph. And let me go ahead and share my screen. And let me know if you can see it well.
Oh, perfect. Thank you.
Perfect. Fantastic. So thank you again for the invitation and for setting up this wonderful panel. And you know, wonderful to follow Justine's talk and talk a little bit about GIS education. And as Joseph mentioned, particularly changes that have occurred recently in GIS education, specifically in the cloud. And this is going to tie a little bit to what Justine talked about, is in this date of COVID and the pandemic and universities closing doors and lockdowns, you know, what are some of the things that we probably should be aware of just in terms of infrastructure, how students access geospatial technology. So my talk is not going to focus on COVID itself, but particularly on the fact that, as Joseph mentioned, now anymore the GIS technology has changed so that we can actually do so much in the cloud, or maybe just things in the cloud where all a student would need is internet connectivity and a browser. And then obviously, you know, just certain access. So I'll talk a little bit about that. But first, to introduce myself, as Joseph mentioned, I lead the education team at Esri, and our team focuses on supporting faculty in their missions of teaching and research, particularly with geospatial education. We work very often with students as well, just in terms of helping them prepare for careers in GIS. So I'll talk a little bit about from student perspective as well as employer perspective. And I also have worked with Johns Hopkins for 9 years almost now in a fully online master's and certificate in GIS. I still teach there, so I teach WebGIS, I teach spatial analytics, so I'm very much an educator myself, and still do a little bit of things like curriculum development, student advising, admissions, and a little bit of administrative duties and such. So anyway, so kind of my talk will be a kind of a compilation of kind of both views from sort of both of these roles. But to me, as educators, our mission, sorry, advance lines real quick. So our mission as educators, of course, is to serve our students, to prepare them for careers when they're done with their education. Obviously, they delve into the industries, into the sectors that they're interested in, that they're well prepared to enter them. But even more so than that, that specifically they have the skills, they have the knowledge, they have the innovation to advance the industries that they're going into just by being in our respective educational institutions. So our mission is to serve them. And believe it or not, before we talk about the cloud, I'll kind of talk a little bit about sort of things in the past, or at least as we see it, things of the past, is that we still get quotes like this. I ended up with a great entry-level GIS job, but I've had to scramble to learn about things other than ArcMap, or just other than sort of a desktop-focused workflow. So we still get lots of this, as well as, so along those lines, I'll kind of bring us back, and again, to talk a little bit about things in the past before we talk about the now. So a bit of time travel back to 2004, so 16 years or so ago. So that's when Facebook was founded. That's how old our students now look. So the typical undergraduate students were about 3 years old then. And this is what our phones looked like, and if we even had phones at all, and they didn't even have cameras, right? So that's about 16 years ago, and that's when this desktop technology sort of first came out, and it was actually a little bit earlier than that with the previous versions. But the point is that the world has significantly changed since then. And then, obviously we have changed a lot along with it, but we're still sort of seeing some of these kind of bits and pieces that are focusing very much on either just technology or just desktop-focused technology as well. So I'll talk a little bit about digital transformation, but particularly, again, what this means for GIS education today. And as Joseph mentioned, there's so many things that we can just do in the cloud now. And we can call it modern GIS. We can call it, you'll see different names of it, WebGIS or Cloud GIS or SAS GIS. Again, just this geospatial technology that lives in the cloud. You can call it your favorite name, but the point of it is that it's not just this desktop technology only. It's not like desktop is necessarily going away. There's still some time and place for it, but it is a lot more. It is so much more than just that. So again, kind of thinking back when Joseph and I were talking earlier, so many things are cloud-based now, right? And when we think about geospatial technology, some of the things, the core GIS functions, things like mapping, like visualization, like data management or spatial analysis or sharing and such. So some of these key functions have been around for a long time, and they haven't changed. We're still doing those things, but how we do them has changed, right? So the technology has changed, the workflow has changed, the skills and such have changed as well. And anymore, all that a student would need is that internet connection and connectivity in a browser, and of course access to some of this technology that is available. So now we can have students stand up Python notebooks, and just again within a browser they can run Python notebooks without necessarily installing Jupyter or doing something local. We can have students work with and work on, so a lot of the discussions earlier were about community science and citizen science and collaboration and such. So we can have either faculty or students stand up hubs or portals and facilitate that either obviously in class collaboration or across the institution, the university collaboration, or with outside entities or bring industries and such. So we can stand up these hubs and portals. And again, all of it is just all in the cloud. Imagery, we can stream imagery services. We can do analytics on imagery services. We can host imagery services in the cloud, or whether it's in AWS or other cloud providers. So again, lots and lots of things these days are cloud-based. And when it comes to this geospatial technology, and again, especially when the days of COVID, we saw this a lot, where how this sort of shift was even more so accelerated, because indeed, when universities closed doors, it was very difficult sometimes to either provide the infrastructure or have someone install software on different machines, or they didn't have machines, and so on and so on. So things are quite a little bit different. And again, kind of looking forward, those are the items that are important, that are to focus on. Some things, for example, for students, I'll tie it a little bit back to jobs, but web-based applications or dashboards or mobile applications. And again, in the previous talks, there was a lot of information about data collection, or again, gathering information, or hubs and portals and such. And there's still, again, with desktop technologies, there's still a time and place for it. Say there's more advanced processes that one needs to run to answer certain questions. But the important part is that these desktop applications, they're now sort of connected to the cloud as well. They're not just standing out in a silo out there. Any analysis that is done, any modeling that is done, any results that are generated, they can either be shared to the cloud or shared with our community, with our stakeholders. And of course, that could be made publicly to everyone, or privately just within a group of individuals or a group of constituents and such. So again, lots and lots of things are cloud-based. And it's important to recognize that. And, in terms of the skills that employers are looking for, and again, just kind of talking through, seeing different industries, what different employers are asking for, at least asking of new employees that they're getting, and application configuration. And we're not talking necessarily about programming. That's kind of the second bullet, but this is basically sort of anyone being able to build applications, web applications, mobile applications, but to do it sort of relatively quickly, relatively from scratch, to kind of be attuned to that technology to be able to, again, either show results or perform certain function and such. Another skill is the automation piece of it. And of course, yes, many employers are looking for Python skills and programming, and whether we're automating certain tasks or modeling a process and such. Another one is enterprise cloud administration. Again, not everyone needs to know this, but within organizations, again, across various sectors and industries, the cloud environments, once stood up, they're wonderful. They're, sort of relatively easy to run, but still someone has got to either manage them or administer them or such. And then this one is the one that's probably a little bit harder, and it never should be just about the technology itself, but more so thinking about requirements gathering, more business technical, in a sense that these are some of the soft skills. So student being able to look at a problem, obviously analyze it, figure out what is needed to be done, collect information, talk to constituents, communicate with various entities and such to actually be able to carry out whatever is it that project is that they're employed or hired to do, sort of thing. So, and that's the one that, again, it's sort of probably a little bit more of the challenging one, but it's a very, very, very important one to think about. And some of these came exactly for just excerpts from different job ads that are there. Things like, yes, operations dashboards. So creating these sorts of applications that are interactive, they're intuitive, they're completely web-based, or story maps and such that are easy for constituents to go look up information, online or SaaS GIS, that is. So again, internet connectivity is what the recipient is going to need, and they're going to be able to look at these applications, will be able to host information, host data, and such. Of course, some programming there, business requirements, so establishing relationships, assessing what some of these requirements are. And another one, these solutions that are, that are certain solutions that, again, employer is going to be looking for. So those are the kinds of skills that students, as they're graduating, that it's important that they realize. And again, thinking back to the wonderful ideas that Justine shared in the time of COVID, especially with the browser, the ability to have our students do a lot of this work just by having a browser and connectivity, it's very, very important. And just as a kind of as a wrap up, a couple of ideas or things to think about, in a sense that when we talk about geospatial technology, it's almost in a sense easier to teach now. Specifically, when we talk about students, they are very technology savvy. They're very technology inclined. For them, it is easy, and they, in many cases, either they don't know programming, or relatively speaking, of course, easier to kind of pick up some of the concepts. But the point of it is they're technology savvy to be able to understand what some of these technological skills are. From faculty perspective, there's so many resources, and one of the things that Justine talked about is communities coming together and either helping one another, which is an extremely important part, an extremely important aspect of it, and also resources sharing, right? So there's lots and lots of resources that are out there that are either faculty produced or university produced, or they're various technologies produced that are helping in terms of teaching and facilitating courses and such. And of course, some of these resources that are out there, it's not just the resource and here you go and then and that's it. Of course, we as faculty, we sort of can use and leverage those as the stepping stones in the background as the sort of the foundational things, but then we challenge students with additional things, additional problems to solve and such. So, but anyway, the point of it is lots of resources that are out there, and there's a lot of camaraderie that is taking place. And more so at the university level, not so much teaching-wise, but for thinking from administration point of view, from program administration point of view, of course, it's always important to attract talents, to want students to come and join our university. In terms of obviously things that are important, having that innovative curriculum is something that students are looking for. Having diversity of faculty that they want to work with. So all of those things, again, it's having that notion of, okay, so we have an innovative program. We will teach some of these innovative skills that will help you down the road. These are the things that are sort of important for us to recognize, more so again from the program administration level. So with that, I'll stop sharing and turn it back over to you, Joseph.
Yeah, thank you very much. Well, I was proud of myself to be able to listen so fast. Lots of content, and of course, to focus a bit on the skills and competences, not only in the general digital age, but in the context of digital earth. That again, I believe, gave all of us, a lot of food for thought and material for further questions. So thank you, Jerry, for that. With that, I'd be happy to bring on Victoria Rautenbach for the next talk. You should be able to share your slides already with the sharing button on the bottom. Great to see that. Victoria is a senior lecturer in geography, geoinformatics at the University of Pretoria. As I already mentioned earlier, she's involved with ISPOS, but also serving on the OSGeo Board of Directors and the Geo for All initiative. So I'm very glad that Victoria brings two particular perspectives to the table. One is the open community, and of course the African perspective as well. With that, I think you maybe still need to be unmuted. maybe we click both at the same time. So you should, yeah, hear it right now. Screen is yours. Over to you, Victoria.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yes, so as mentioned, I am a lecturer in geoinformatics. I'm mostly focused on open source with the students as well. And I'll be telling you a bit about two organizations that we work with specifically at our university, but also is very involved in Africa as well. So firstly, I think when people mention open geospatial, it usually comes up for ArcGIS, QGIS conversation, but there's actually a lot more when we speak about open. So one of the things here is a couple of different applications, and also when we speak about open data, OpenStreetMap is also a very big player in this field. So firstly, I would quickly introduce you to Youthmappers. So this is an organization that is supported by USAID, and they have a network of chapters for just over 230 chapters at universities. This is very much focused on the students, and the students drive these chapters and also select projects that they want to actually work on. So the faculty involvement is quite limited within Youthmappers. Then the next one is Geo for All. This falls under OSGeo, but is also in collaboration with quite a number of other international societies, for example, the ICA, ISPRS, also UNIGIS, etc. So there's quite a number of people that are involved. Here the focus is a lot more on the actual academics as well as researchers. So we are currently just over 140 labs internationally, and I'll show you a bit about the involvement in Africa. So here it's more about supporting teaching as well as research. Just a little bit about OSGeo membership. So as you can see here, a bit about the numbers. And so what I wanted to especially highlight that currently in Africa, my focus will be mostly about Africa for this. There's only 11 charter members, which is 2.3%. You can see that the oceanic area also has quite a low number, as well as Asia. But this 2.3 is quite low. So for the Geo for All and Youthmappers involvement, there is quite a few more Youthmappers chapters within Africa, which is quite great. And I'll show you a little bit about why that is also the case. And then for Geo for All, there are some laboratories, but we would definitely want to expand this, especially as open source is so powerful in a developing country context. So if you look at this map about the unmapped places, that you can see that Asia, the Middle East, and then especially Africa is quite unmapped. And this also links then definitely to why there is so much activity happening at the moment within Africa with Youthmappers, where they actually map their local communities and then contribute this data to OpenStreetMap. If you also look at some news headlines, you always see that how various data can be actually useful to combat COVID, the droughts in Africa, etc. So data is definitely key for Africa's success. Then with regards to open source, from 2004, there was quite a number of articles. I just clicked a couple where the importance of open source software, especially in education, was highlighted. This is due to limited resources, etc. But I do think it's more than just that. We heard now about some other options as well. But through open source, you can also, the students, there's a lot of capacity building that is possible. So in some cases, there might be limited guides, etc. But they have to really get involved in the application. But there's also the fact that they can look at the source code and see how specific functions are implemented and see how they can maybe improve it as well. So that's definitely a benefit. Just to highlight a couple of projects that Youthmappers and Geo4All has been involved in Africa. So one of the main featured ones at the moment with Youthmappers is in Sierra Leone, where they are mapping the power infrastructure and trying to design improved power infrastructure. This is done in collaboration with the Arizona State University. So this is also great because there's this collaboration between African country and US, and they also get funding from USD for this. This is just a bit about the actual process. So you can see that there's the financial implications that are considered, as well as then finally some visualizations, which is then used to communicate back to the community, etc. For Geo4All with the ICA, there was the publication of this poster that highlighted some of the different projects within Geo4All labs. So this one is at our university, where we mapped we are currently also working there, mapping informal settlements, because these are often not mapped and also not at all available within the local government data. Other options are also other things are also the mini conferences that are occurring, as well as the general newsletter. For our university, we also had this project on the blue economy, where our students were mapping specific areas along the coast, and then in collaboration with a university in Brazil, demo that they created with what can be done. So this is to see what is the current situation at your local beach, what is the water quality, etc. So just to summarize briefly, my aim was definitely to just introduce you to Youthmappers and Geo4All if you are not aware of these organizations. I think it's definitely beneficial to Africa, as well as any other university, to get involved in these activities, because you slot into a larger community where you can get involved with different projects and also create collaborations. I think most of us are aware of the benefits of using open source as well as open data. So hopefully this inspires you to have a look at what is out there and what you can use for your next project within the open data and open source environment. Thank you very much.
Wonderful, Victoria. Thank you. It was really highly complimentary and very valuable perspective you put the table. And I'm absolutely sure that there will be quite a few questions and comments coming forward during the panel. So let me invite everyone in the audience to use the Q&A to help us to questions, comments, things you want to bring up. You don't have to wait until you finish with the final presentation. Please stand with offering. This brings me over to the final, the something this afternoon, morning, or night, or wherever you're sitting. Let me introduce and welcome the Director of the Critical Science Institute at the University of Southern California, leading initiatives, and we had a discussion quite a few weeks ago from a distance learning perspective. Has this become the norm now? So what is the difference between online with education and distance education? John, any thoughts you want to share with us on that? Over to you.
Thank you. Can you see my slides, Joseph?
All fine.
All right, thank you. Yeah, so I'm not going to talk about what we teach, but I'm going to talk about how we teach and how this might change post-COVID. So I'm going to use a conference as an analogy first, and then I'm going to say something about teaching before and after COVID, briefly talk about 4 modalities, say something about what we do at USC and what we imagine a hybrid future might look like. So I'm going to use the Esri user conference as an example. In 2019, the Esri user conference attracted about 18,000 participants, I think, spread over 7 or 8 days, organized around the San Diego Convention Center. And the Esri user conference in 2020 was virtual. It attracted apparently 80,000 participants at the plenary sessions that were, instead of being concentrated in one day, now spread over 3 days. And most sessions were accompanied by Q&A sessions with the presenters, as you would in an in-person event, but also with, among other things, copies of the slides they used and some other materials they wanted to share. And, you know, I don't know what's going to happen in the future, but I think Esri and professional societies and others that organize and hold conferences are probably thinking about a hybrid future, an in-person event with sessions that are streamed live as well, because on the one hand, the value proposition for an in-person meeting is strong, but through COVID, we've learned that it's not a binary. People either choose to attend or not. There's a large swath of people that would participate, but they just don't want to be or can't be in the site where you hold the event. And, you know, to do this well in the future, in this case, the San Diego Convention Center would need some upgrades to be able to replicate the Esri UC 2020 virtual experience. And people organizing conferences like Esri and us and other people would need to think carefully about what things are in-person only and what things are available both virtually as well as in-person, and probably simultaneously. So that's the backdrop for what I'm going to say about teaching. So teaching pre-COVID. So in person, we had dedicated classrooms and laboratories. The top picture on the right there is the GIS lab at Massachusetts Institute of Technology, for example. Typically, universities charge tuition, among other things, to cover the cost of faculty and staff. And many of our universities are also set up to provide food, to provide housing, to ensure public safety, to provide transportation and so forth. At our campus, we call these auxiliaries, and our inability to provide auxiliaries to students that are not here has been a large part of our problems in terms of our budget and so forth. In the online world, we may or may not, up to now, have needed classrooms. We still charge tuition to cover the cost of faculty and staff, but experience has taught us that we need other support. In many cases, we need instructional design, we need technology. The picture at the bottom is the interface to the University of Maryland's virtual GIS lab. All of us probably for the last 8 months have been standing up something like this, and so that needs, in our case at least, virtual desktops and servers. And in many online programs, you need a separate staff to help with recruitment and instructional support. And in many universities, these were run as separate operations until now. And what's sort of buried in the middle of this, at least as I think about what we do at USC, is that sometimes we're aiming to be in person, other times we're aiming to be online. Sometimes we're aiming to have the teaching experience be synchronous, and other times we're quite happy for it to be asynchronous. And in some cases, people conflate these terms so that in-person is synchronous and online is asynchronous. But I think COVID-19's taught us that that does not have to be the case. So what does teaching look like post-COVID-19? Well, it relies heavily on internet connectivity. I'm sitting in my office this morning because I've learned that if I want to guarantee my connectivity to a session like this, it's not generally a good idea to sit in my house. We need video conferencing software. In this case, we're using WebEx, but typically I'm much more familiar with Zoom. But all of these video conferencing software have capabilities for recordings, for breakout rooms, and so on. And typically, we need learning management systems. So there are many of these too, Blackboard, Canvas. But again, we've typically thought of these as either in-person and synchronous or online and asynchronous. At least that's how I've thought about them. And I don't think we have to think about them in those ways anymore, because we might be able to do all four of these things simultaneously. So let me tell you then, just briefly, at USC we have 4 master's programs. We have one in spatial data science, a second in spatial economics and data analysis, and currently those 2 programs are in person. And then we have, for the longest time, an online program in geographic information science and technology, and a more recent one in human security and geospatial intelligence. And in order to support these programs the last 4 or 5 years, we've basically stood up separate sections in the 2 modalities. So if we're going to use, say, a gateway class, Concepts for Spatial Thinking, when we're using it in the in-person programs, then we have a section that we teach live in person. And then if we're doing the same in our online programs, we have a section that's not live, it's asynchronous, and largely the exchange and the contact works through videos, video presentations, office hours, and a set of materials we share and assignments that the students provide back to us and about which we provide feedback and so forth. And in our case, in the Spatial Sciences Institute at USC, one unit administers both these in-person programs as well as the online programs. So they're all part of our enterprise, but I would note in many other universities across the world, these operations, meaning online programs and in-person programs, are spread across separate academic units. And in some cases, in a branch of the university that was set up some time ago with this idea that we were going to specialize in online, and that was somehow a different enterprise than teaching on campus in person. So my last slide is to wonder what the future might look like. And I have sort of 2 guiding observations that have been very persuasive in me thinking about this topic. The first is we've been teaching our online Masters of Science in Geographic Information Science and Technology for a little more than 10 years. I think so far we've graduated about somewhere between 300 and 350 students. And using government data in the United States, I think we are the largest program in terms of number of graduates. And that's been very successful, but I've long been aware that when students report back about job interviews and things like that, they often find an audience in their job interview that's skeptical about the value of online education. Online has often been thought as a notch below, I think, in person. And, you know, I think what the last 9 months may have shown us all is that online teaching may be more attractive moving forward. And as a consequence, choosing online as the modality for one's education might be more attractive as well. And the second, I think, is that I believe students are going to likely want more flexibility moving forward. And so it's not the case that you're going to have an opportunity to say, well, you either take the online or you take the residential degree. Maybe the student wants to be online on Tuesdays and Thursdays and asynchronous, and on Mondays, Wednesdays, and Fridays, they want to be in person and synchronous. Or maybe they want to do a week about, or maybe a semester about, or they want to do one class in person and synchronous and the other class online and asynchronous. And so what we've been thinking about in terms of the programs that I operate here is that our engineering school has basically built from the ground up over a number of years what they call their distance education network. And that entails that all of this, in-person, online, synchronous and asynchronous, all happens together. In the sense that you have specially equipped classrooms that enable you to show slides, to draw on a whiteboard, to sketch problems, et cetera, but more importantly, it's not a room that an instructor by themselves walks into, because as you see at the picture at the top there's a control room with dedicated professionals whose job it is to help the faculty and teaching assistants to optimize the experience, the performance when they're using these classrooms. And to my way of thinking, this means that the benefactor is the student, because they could choose to be in person or they could choose to be remote. Remote would be a better word than online here. They could choose to be either in person or remote and synchronous. But because all of these materials and these experiences are being recorded, they could also then choose to be remote and asynchronous. And they could switch that up with any kind of granularity they wanted. And the burden then for us as educators and instructional designers and so forth is to be able to build meaningful and roughly equivalent experiences and interactions for the students and us when they choose synchronous versus asynchronous or in-person versus remote as we go forward. And so I think the world is full of new opportunities, and it'll take us some time to work out how to equip ourselves and how to acquire the knowledge and experience to be able to leverage those appropriately. And so that I'll stop, and I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, John. With this, I'd be happy to invite everyone on the panel to come back to the podium, essentially switching on your cameras. Hi, Cherry. Right. And let me maybe highlight that you might have seen on the agenda, there is one kind of separate presentation which has been submitted as a video stream from YouTube by Barbara on Copernicus and Knowledge Hubs about the Copernicus Hub initiative and educational initiative in remote sensing. So this we would invite you to watch independently. I can see that Barbara is watching too, participating today. So if you want to come to the podium, I'd like to invite you to give an indication of that. I can see that pretty much everyone has their microphone muted. For now, John, I'm impolite to you and mute yours because there's some background noise coming this way, but I think you can unmute yourself again when you plan to speak. Again, the invitation to the audience, I can see there is a few comments and questions coming in here already, so please keep them coming. You can use the chat, preferably please use the Q&A. You find the Q&A behind one of the three-dot menu items, typically on your lower right, and there you can pop these up. We've come some way across the 4 talks now, and we started with kind of reflecting on how we did react and what we learned from that, and where we go into the future under the resilience keyword. And resilience per se is a kind of reactive term, I guess I would read it that way. But of course, we want to be resilient in the future, but the trigger for that was to a large degree the COVID situation. And then at the end, John kind of took the lessons learned and moved forward to a kind of hybrid concept, or some pointers where we maybe should start thinking how to make this actually happen. Because my personal experience is that I'm doing okay in classrooms, but now I'm absolutely comfortable talking to my screen. Actually had the experience a couple of weeks ago to teach an in-person class in a huge classroom, well-separated individuals, and I felt strange, right? After months and months of talking to the screen, to really talk to physical people in the classroom again. So it was an interesting experience that how fast it's possible to unlearn those direct interaction matters, which many of us are missing. So to phrase that into kind of a question to everyone first on the panel, which changes do you think will be retained, which will turn into permanent fixtures and features, under the assumption that we are not going to just switch back as if nothing had happened, but the thesis there, the hypothesis would be at least some of the things we learned involuntarily will become features. So what would you think will be the really structural fundamental changes in our learning practice, learning and teaching practice overall? So who of you would like to take it up and go with that? Just unmute yourself. Everyone else will see that. Jerry?
Sure, I'll go first. But yeah, I mean, it's, some of it does tie back to what John was talking about. But I think what would stay around is the comfort level with some of these digital technologies that we're using right now. We're using WebEx or Zoom or Teams or, whatever that corresponding, technology is, and having some of those meetings, whether it's, student advising 101, whether it's faculty helping a student, that probably could, I could imagine a student thinking, well, I'm not going to come to campus. Why should I come to campus when we can just kind of meet like this? And it could be very effective. We can pretty much accomplish the same thing. So some of those one-on-one interactions, to me, are likely here to stay. And of course, again, tying it back to sort of what John talked about at the end, we could, we all miss the face-to-face interaction, right? We all miss it dearly, or at least I do. But some of those even class synchronous meetings, we know that they can indeed be done, in an online environment quite efficiently, quite effectively. So some of that, to me, it's likely to stay as well. Maybe not all class meetings, but just some of it. Students are going to be looking for that flexibility for sure.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Justine here. I agree with what Jerry just said. I think it'll be a mixture of online isn't going to go away, but as John highlighted, it'll be some form of hybrid. And it will depend on the institution and what their strategies are and policies, and also the students that are at that institute. For example, a lot of our students are overseas and then they come to ITC. So in some cases, it might be better for them, to have that flexibility. In other cases, they might want to come here. I think for some of them, having that experience coming here and interacting and learning about new environments is also a good thing. So I think completely going online is not a good thing. I think it has to be some balance in there. And then also, with the more fundamental pieces of delivering courses and developing your courses, again, we've seen how easy it is to interact with each other. Some things that didn't work so well from the survey that we did are big group interactions, but the technology is changing. I mean, we've seen it with how technologies have changed for conferencing. I mean, it's fantastic what has happened there, and being able to do those interactions. So we can start to use those in our classrooms for those different types of interactions.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Maybe let me just interject here from a practical perspective. Just if anyone watching has the screen jumping around with the speakers taking all the space and then go back, at the top right-hand side, you have a small grid widget, so that's better suited for watching a discussion like that. And anyone who wants to speak or wants us to unmute your microphone, you do have a small hand to be raised. when you open the participants panel at the bottom of the participants panel. And of course, chat and Q&A are shared channels. So sorry for that practical interruption here. Let's go back. So what changes likely will be permanent? Do we expect to be permanent? You take us.
Joseph, this is John. I think two things that the last 6 or 8 months has shown us all is that I think video is here to stay, right? And so, you know, at least in the context that we had online programs, we were not making nearly as extensive use of video as we are now. And I noticed that about our university too. We have not had any in-person instruction since the middle of March. But the university has taken every common use classroom and set them up so that you could do simultaneous teaching with an in-person as well as a remote audience. And so I don't think they're going to turn their back on that investment. They're going to be looking for ways to use that. And the slides at the end that I showed you is sort of that version wrapped up several steps, because we want to actually build a much more enriching and deep experience when we do both of those things together. And the second thing I think that's not going to change is that, you know, at least as we taught remotely using, in our case, Zoom over the last 8 months, you know, the Zoom was pretty well embedded in Blackboard in our case, because that's the university's sort of default learning platform. And as a consequence, then also was recording whatever sessions we had with students. And so, you know, students, their expectation now is, well, if I skip a day, there's going to be a recording. You know, it's not an all or nothing deal anymore. And so I'm just thinking that the driver now is really the customer, the young men and women that come to us to further their education. And they're going to have a large say in what happens next. And I think they're going to feel empowered.
Yeah. So Victoria, any take on? I could imagine some of that might be different perspectives. Some might be the same. So what's your thoughts?
Yes. So as John said, video definitely is here to stay. We had a bit of a feedback session in our department, and a lot of the lecturers pointed out that they would keep the videos for next year's, etc. But I also was fortunate enough to actually meet with my students once a week, because it's a small group. And when we went back to face-to-face classes, all the students did attend. But afterwards, they would ask me, but where's the recordings of these sessions now? So then they wanted all that again, because I think it took a while to make the switch to using video, etc. But now they're quite reliant on that. I think in our case, we would definitely, when possible, move completely back to face-to-face, because access to devices and internet is definitely a problem. So in South Africa, I think we are still much better off than other parts of the world, but we still had a lot of students that can't install basic software. They can't use online solutions because they don't have internet access. So that is really a challenge.
Yeah. Well, actually, that brings me over to the next question I'm picking there. So what's the more critical resource, the local and desktop, or to fix the internet access and use that as the core element? So in some way, I think we all recognize that cloud has turned into the, or maybe one core infrastructure. So if we start from that premise, and going down that road, it would mean we need to have a fire hose of internet and the browser in front of it, and that'll be that. So if we would go by that, what's still missing in this cloud infrastructure? Because we have communication, we have SaaS software, data, that's a link to a service. Is there anything missing in cloud as the ubiquitous and pervasive infrastructure for our educational activities?
Well, Joseph, I have an all institute meeting coming up in a week's time, and one of the ideas I'm planning to float is that we no longer have in our big general education classes in-person labs, because every year students tell us they hate them. They hate the idea of having to sit there and spend 2 hours working on a computer. And, you know, they see all these advertisements, both in the proprietary and open software world, that says spatial computing anywhere, anytime. So why can't we do our hands-on assignments and learning when we want, where we want, and you simply provide the fire hose and the browser that you were talking about? And so we were already doing that for our online masters populations, and my proposal is we invest in more resources around that, and that we abandon in-person 2-hour lab sessions in some of these big classes. And they still have weekly assignments, but during that week they can do them when they want, and we take the human resource and we devote it to perhaps what you were thinking about, which is that there would be more opportunities for Q&A, for coaching, for answering questions that came up that were sort of out of left field but still helpful and important. And the only worry I have there is that there's a lot of then kind of impromptu one-on-one discussion, and how do we capture that and share it with the whole group? That's maybe the piece that I haven't got sorted out yet. But you know, I am thinking that this is a catalyst for change.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you touch upon the capability there.
Yep.
Yeah, definitely agree. It's definitely a catalyst for change. And, you know, it's interesting, Joseph, when your last question as to what's missing. I mean, of course, you know, barring what Victoria mentioned, not having internet connectivity, if hopefully we can fix that, we can do a lot of things, right? So we can close a lot of the gaps there. And of course, you know, some of the hardware and access technology issues, some of that is still going to be there, but especially for some of the either, you know, sort of the general classes that John described, sort of not the highly specified things, we can do away with cloud, with just doing things when it comes to geospatial technology, with simply having that browser and having that connectivity. Again, not for everything, but technically we could. It is possible. The technology is there. To answer your question, to me, what is missing is more so the time that we have as faculty. Is probably one thing to just kind of revision some of either that, what we do in classes, or, you know, some of the curriculum. Maybe that is sort of the missing link, or maybe what we do need more is, going back to Justine's talk, is more of the community and collaboration and sort of helping each other how we're approaching this. There's a lot of that, thankfully. Maybe more of that in terms of how do we just design cloud-based browser only, at least for the general things, right?
Yeah. So actually 2 comments from the audience remarking on the not general validity of the assumption that the broadband fire hose would be there. It's not the case everywhere and not the case for everyone. So clearly that's one point to be kept in mind. But still, if we go down this road, anything which is missing in the sense that we cannot do that, we cannot replicate that, there is scalability issues, obviously, when the individual interaction on the other end. Any further comment by one of you on that question? Then maybe I move towards the last one, which has been set up here, as long as I don't miss any of these. Let me see what's up there. Yeah, that's the one emphasis that clearly personal interaction is not something to be replaced by online. So we maybe would not go down the line of what some university administrators, I guess years ago, maybe not so much anymore today. They thought, that's great, we record that and then play back, and university is a YouTube channel, and we set up a business model for that. So I think we would not need to refresh this type of discussion. Yeah, but coming back to my last question there, and that I move from how we teach and learn, maybe a little bit over to what and to whom. I guess all of us have been involved in various kinds of, be they called curriculum initiatives or bodies of knowledge and matters like that. And what's one concern is that, okay, there is study programs in geospatial. Yeah, John has mentioned quite a few of these in different formats. But you at the same time talked about the general education class, right? So geospatial competences, and I'm talking more about the competences and maybe a little bit less about the skills here. They, to some degree, are transversal, and that's what I would like to connect with the digital Earth idea of the venue we are at. So if we subscribe to this spatial perspective, which is critically important in so many walks of life and society and economies and environments, how can we bring these competences, digital Earth competences, into education in a more general way, that it's not a take it or leave it proposition, whether you go into one of the spatial disciplines, there's many of these, or do other stuff, but we can make it kind of general education. And if so, what would be the learning objectives of digital Earth in general education in transversal programs? Any thoughts, any suggestions on that, anyone?
Maybe Joseph, since I brought it up. You know, I don't think, at least in the context that I understand my own university and perhaps the United States, there's much value to chasing the dream that every student graduating from a 4-year degree program would have a class in sort of spatial perspectives, because you know every discipline could argue they have a competing kind of goal that's equally valuable. So, you know, what we currently in my institute, we believe that we reach about 15 or 20% of all the graduates of undergraduates in the University of Southern California through 4 very pointed kind of classes that use spatial perspectives for particular themes. So one class is called the Water Planet. Another one is called Sustainability Science in the City. A third one is Human Populations and Natural Hazards. And the fourth one that we've been changing the title with is called, it has a name like Digital Earth, but so far that proves to be the least popular of our 4 classes. And so, you know, initially the Water Planet was by far the most popular of the classes, but now the Sustainability Science in the City classes is twice as large or larger than all the other 3 classes every semester we offer it. So, you know, I think it's to what service that you put the spatial perspective that then determines sort of the size of the population you reach. And you know, I'm comfortable with that, but I'm guessing I have quite a few colleagues around the world that think we shouldn't need to do that. That spatial by itself is a viable rationale for why something should happen. So, and you know, I typically talk about spatial temporal and not spatial anymore as well. So I would enlarge that conversation.
So that's such an important point. And interestingly, all the topics you mentioned won't exist without the spatial domain.
Correct. Yes. Yep.
Any other aspects on that? Because there are schools as well, not only university.
Justine here.
Go ahead, Justine.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
No, you go.
I was just going to say that I think one of the things is also taking into consideration, the teaching them the competencies within the university, but making sure that those are realistic when they go out in the real world. So if they're going back to areas where you don't have those fire hoses and stuff, how they deal with those, and the service-based information to make those decisions and to apply that. That there's still enough of a divide right now that making that happen is a little bit problematic. But I think that's something definitely to work towards in the future.
Okay, thank you. Since we lost Victoria's at least video stream, Cherry? Oh, you're back, right.
Sure. I was just going to chime in to, kind of tying back in terms of, what John said. No, we're absolutely, not going to graduate and everyone is going to, be proficient in, geospatial technology, every student at the university, that is. But I think, again, to kind of chime in the importance of, for all of these various either courses, whether it's on sustainability, whether it's on earth and mineral resources, whether it's a physics class. And when we think about geospatial education, it's not, something that has to encompass like a whole class, right? It could be 2 weeks out of a class. It could be a project that students work on. It could be an assignment that students worked on, just to expose them to geospatial technology. It doesn't have to be the thing, the focus, make them the geospatial professional. And to me, that's really, kind of an important thing to acknowledge, right? That's, Joseph, the answer to your question in terms of, how we do that.
Thank you.
Can I add into that? Because I think I agree with you, Jerry, there. So it's a piece of that. And I think one of the things that we're moving towards is this challenge-based education where you build these teams where people come with these different skill sets to help solve a problem. And I think that feeds into that. And spatial is one of those, and the ability to be able to do that.
Exactly.
Thank you. Victoria, any final thoughts you want to share on that?
Yeah, I think in our university it will definitely not happen that everyone takes the course, because I think we have too many fields and things like that. But we did now design a module that is specifically for education students, so to teach them how to teach geoinformatics in school, because this was often a part of the content in geography that was skipped over. So in small things like that, we have tried to incorporate a bit more.
Yeah, thank you. Let me take the opportunity to share a couple of the points from the audience, which came in on the kind of private line here, and that goes mostly back to the format idea. So is the fire hose and the browser good enough? And the remark, which is certainly very valid, that some people do much better with immediate personal contact than others. So it's not for everyone. That connects in some way that John was bringing in the hybrid keyword here. And that doesn't mean it has to be the same mix between those 4 dimensions for everyone involved. What plays into that is what Justine just mentioned. So one of our first year courses in kind of a digital program, we focused on a collaborative project, which had a couple of perspectives. First year students should get to know each other, and they should not be brought up to the same level on each and everything, but everyone should bring in their strengths and should enhance those areas they feel motivated to. So they should work in a division of labor in that project, not in all projects. And then another remark coming in here would be, if we go too far down the road, ultimately online only, it has a potential to make digital divides, the plural is mine here, digital divides worse, not everyone. It's not for everyone again, and the constraints and conditions are different, and that in turn to battle that potential effect, that again might require more one-on-one instruction or support or training to go with that. So actually, I'm very happy that we had a lot of great thoughts going around the panel here. You all brought very different and, yeah, as I said, complementary perspectives to the table. So thank you, everyone, to engage on the panel and beyond. And at those very different times of the day, you have arrived by now. Thank you for that. And while I'm saying that, I'd like to bring our good friend and chair of the organization board, Evgeny Yerenchenko, to the panel. I hope you've made it up here, Eugene. And I'd invite you to, just share a couple words finishing off the day for today. I guess inviting everyone to joining us again at 11 Central European time tomorrow, so it's like yesterday's time. Eugene, it'll be over to you.
I'm ready.
Yeah, we can hear you. And over to you. The panel steps back.
Oh, okay. Dear colleagues, let me join you from Protvino, Central Russia. Both sessions today were extremely expressive, exceptionally for me as old neogeographer. Today was absolute success from my point of view. Both sessions were exceptionally good and informative. We are getting online experience every day, and that is good. Digital health is a very versatile science, and in addition to citizen science, there is also academic science. On behalf of the organizing committee, I invite you all to come to our website tomorrow in the morning and take part in the pivotal day, as I guess, of our summit. Tomorrow you'll be able to participate in a very interesting panel discussion named Relevance of Digital Health to Support UN SDG by 2030, and one more session about using digital health in the state audit. I could suppose this is something opposite to citizen science, but required as well. Tomorrow we conclude with a summary of the summit, the first summit of the kind in history of ISD. I hope it will be good. They should be very intensive, very positive, very significant for all of us and for IDE as well. So get as much rest as you can before tomorrow's session. We'll meet again at 11 a.m. Central European time. See you tomorrow.